Maura, thank you again for inviting me to participate in this meeting. I just have a few slides as well. I really enjoyed hearing Fazela's comments, and I think there'll be a bit of overlap between us on some of the themes. I should start by saying that I am not an expert on South Africa, so the material that I'm going to present is based on the broader range of interactions that our organization has had with parliaments in different parts of the world. We are the UK's public body that supports democratic development in other countries, and we currently have offices in about 30 countries around the world and programs in more, so a relatively widespread of understanding of parliamentary process in different countries. I am going to make 6 points briefly that are set out here. Some of them will only need a second because I think with this audience, you already know why parliaments are important and why this subject matter is important. But I'll then say a little bit about the spread of codes of conduct in the world and 3 issues which we have seen come up, which can be challenges to them. And I'll try and keep it quite brief to allow discussion. So the first point is that this is a really important subject. In my mind, I'm of course a fan of parliaments. I think that parliaments matter because democracy can only work if parliaments work. And of course, all the other public institutions are important as well. But in many ways, parliaments are the institution which has the clearest central importance. And I've put a quote on the slide, which I like from the IPU, which ends with the phrase that an MP's job is to ensure national and citizen well-being, and nothing could be more important than that, I think. As Fazela alluded to, though, public trust in parliaments is very low, and that's pretty much across the world. And there are a few small data points to illustrate this. One relating to the UK, which says how steeply public trust has declined, with, in 2021, just a couple of years ago, 63% of those surveyed thought that politicians were merely out for themselves rather than out for the public. This, I know, will be hard to see on the screen, but this is from a 2018 Global Attitude Survey, which said that globally, the median was that 61% felt that officials in their country didn't care what ordinary people thought. The South Africa result is towards the bottom, and it's about at that level. 60% felt that elected officials in their country didn't care what ordinary people think. And then this is something from the Pew organization, which does a lot of surveying, a little bit older, 2017. And it was looking at the difference in trust in Parliament between people who are, I suppose, the mainstream and those with strongly populist views. And the spread between the two in each figure shows how, at the bottom, what the difference was between those with populist views and others in the population. Much lower trust in parliaments among those with populist views. This is from a range of European countries, including the UK. And then finally, on this slide, the OECD did some work a couple of years ago on trust in governance more generally, and identified a few significant issues that have been made worse by the COVID crisis, ending with the third one, which was an increasing distrust of and disengagement from democratic processes. And we've seen that actually in a number of election turnouts in various countries since the pandemic. The next point is that while trust has been declining for many years in parliaments and in government more generally in many countries, a response over the past 15 years ago or so has been the introduction of codes of conduct or codes of ethics in many parliaments. And Fazela's presentation described the history in South Africa. The IPU database shows that there's a narrow majority of parliaments in the world which do have one, and those with a code of conduct or ethics are shown in blue on this map. And the quote on the screen is from a piece of work which we have been involved with for a while, which is showing that having an enforceable code of conduct is more or less becoming the norm in the world. But, and there is a but, there are a few ways in which the impact of codes of conduct can be compromised in different countries. And this is where there's a bit of overlap with what Fazela said. So the first problem on this screen is that enforcement can be weak, and there are a range of ways in which trying to get this to move on there. There are a range of ways in which codes of conduct or ethics can be enforced. There are different examples in different countries. And Ian in the next presentation will say a bit about the mechanisms in the UK, but these are all ones that have been used or are used in different countries. But of course, if these are weak or don't exist, then enforcement is a problem, and there are pros and cons to each, and the local context is very, very important. But it is also true that the culture, the political culture in a country matters. And this quote is from a World Bank study of almost 20 years ago, and I'll read it out. If there is no consensus among MPs about what constitutes improper behavior, and about the nature of the ethics problems, and about what changes should be made to make the ethics regime work, then any ethics reform is bound to fail. So you have to have a good understanding and a willingness to make change in order for a reform process to make progress. So that's the second problem that we found with codes of conduct in different countries. So that's the first problem. The second problem is if the incentives in a country are in favor of corruption or bad behavior such that they outweigh the incentives for enforcement of ethical standards. And I've used the phrase cost of politics here. WFDR organization has a research program in collaboration with our Dutch colleagues called The Cost of Politics. There's a website with it. And it's looked at how much it costs to be involved in politics in a range of countries. And I've just pulled out something from the case study in Kenya, which shows how high the cost of becoming involved in politics can be in some countries. And the Senate seat in Kenya can cost around $350,000 in order to contest the seat. And of course, not just in Kenya, but anywhere where the cost of politics is so high, of becoming a candidate, of running your campaign, of dealing with the demands of constituents. A consequence of this is that, as the highlighted passage says, there's an increased incentive for members of the legislature to engage in corrupt practices. So that can be a significant issue. And of course, these high costs of entering politics can be a barrier in deciding who gets to become an MP. And there are no prizes for guessing that women, persons with disabilities, or other marginalized groups are often excluded from becoming an MP. And that can create a context in which those who are in the legislature are seen as an elite group who more or less can set their own rules. And the effects of having that sort of power structure can also lead to other types of impacts around behavior of those in Parliament. And this quote is from an IPU survey in Europe a few years ago, which showed a very high percentage of women MPs who said that they suffered some kind of harassment, psychological violence, confrontation with sexist behavior during their work. And there's other information about the impact on women just working in Parliament and the parliamentary service as well. And finally, the third problem that I wanted to highlight, and this is my last, effectively my last slide, is about the relationships between individual members of Parliament and political parties. And again, Fazela mentioned this. Now, these tensions between the commitments that MPs have to the institution of Parliament and the commitments they have to their party are a perennial issue. They're an inevitable part of our political systems. However, the ways in which we've seen these tensions managed in different countries can vary a lot between parliaments, depending sometimes on the culture of that parliament and sometimes on other systemic issues. In our own parliament, in the House of Commons in the UK, I think we find a pretty good balance often, because one bit of evidence is the oversight function. The House of Commons select committees actually, I think, do a pretty good job in providing cross-party oversight of the executive. And it may be that the electoral system can play a part in this. We have a first past the post system, which has MPs with very strong ties to their constituencies and pretty good scope for the local branch of their party to select who becomes a candidate and resist the pressures from party headquarters. It may feel different in countries with proportional systems which have party lists and with MPs who can be removed by their headquarters at any time. And I've seen that in a number of countries I've visited. I think the last quote I'm going to put up here will be one that you will be more likely to be familiar with, from the Zonda report on state capture. And it I thought, set this out quite well: a system in which members of Parliament are accountable and beholden to their party bosses is not well suited to securing parliamentary oversight of the executive, comprising, as it generally does, the same party bosses. So that can be an issue as well. So those are the three problems that I wanted to highlight around codes of conduct. And this is obviously just a very brief overview of the issues. I won't try to draw any overarching conclusions, but I think what we've found in our work around the world is that ethics really matters, that it's sometimes addressed by looking at the specific documents like codes of conduct or codes of ethics, but the parliamentary culture and the wider political culture is a really important issue in itself, which can go beyond that, and is something which ought to be a center of attention for the public and for Parliament in every country. So thank you very much for that.